Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. Today we're going to be looking at the Super 6 Principles of Andragogy. Take your program from good to great. I'm here today with June Rawl, who will be participating in the chat, interacting with you there, answering any questions that you have as we go along. If you want to take the time now to say hi, introduce yourself, tell us the district or school that you are representing, and we will try and keep an eye on those as we move along. My name is Brian Bush. I'm an assistant director in Broward County Public Schools at Atlantic Technical College, and I'm thrilled to be spending the afternoon with you. Like all of you, I am a practitioner. I am by no means an expert on these topics. I'm sure there's going to be people attending today that know much more about andragogy and pedagogy than I do, but just want to be able to draw out some connections that we've made here at Atlantic Technical College and some of the ways that we try and bring some of these principles into our adult general education program so that we can, provide a better experience for our AGE students and promote the transition to career and technical programs and really create an environment that's going to lead to more program retention and student persistence, because what we're delivering is matching what the student is arriving at our programs for. As you participate today, you will be muted. You will be in listen only mode. So if you do have a question, please make sure that you type it into the Q&A. You can interact with each other through the chat, but again, if you have a question, it'll be easier for me to monitor the question and answer section. So make sure that any questions that arise through today's presentation, that you do direct those into the Q&A. Okay. So with that said, the target outcomes for today is to know and understand the 6 principles of andragogy. These 6 principles have shifted through time. Originally were 4 principles. Even now they've been come to know as there's a 7th principle, but we'll discuss all of that moving forward. Recognize how these principles differ from pedagogy. And again, there's some shift in this area too, because some of the principles of andragogy are being adopted right now through pedagogy, and the best way that all of us learn, not just adults, learn strategies to bring these principles into action in your classroom, which is kind of an ironic statement, because one of the things that you'll learn about andragogy today is it's really about taking theory and putting it into practice. So it wouldn't be much of a training on andragogy if we didn't share some ways to take these principles or these theories and put them into action in your classrooms. And of course, as IPTE always does, try and provide some planning tools to help your seamless implementation that'll ultimately create more learner motivation, program retention, student persistence, that ultimately leads to the outcomes that we all want. So before we get started, just a brief history of andragogy. The term was first coined by a German high school teacher, Alexander Kapp, and he was just trying to describe the educational theory of Plato. And Plato looked at the andragogy or his educational theory as a reciprocal theory of self-actualization. It was about individual learners and those individual learners reaching their full potential in whatever area their aptitude and potential existed, and about those being aligned and matched up with meeting the needs of society. The interesting thing I really like about this is it sounds a lot like the way we deliver career and technical education to meet the regional needs assessment, taking people and raising their skill levels so that they can reach their full aptitude, and then matching those to the needs of society, which we do through our regional needs assessment. So Plato was way ahead of the game and ultimately on the same page that all of us are on. And then moving from there, Eugene Rosenstock-Huessy developed the theory of adult education being derived from necessity, and this is really where it started to emphasize, it's not just about book learning, it's not just about theory, it's how do we put all of these things into practice. And how do we learn from our mistakes? He was a German educator, and this was happening after Germany's failures in World War I. So, really based upon learning from those failures, learning from those mistakes, taking these theoretical occurrences and the history that's happened, and trying to put into practice some practical solutions so that we can learn from it and do better. And then most often when you talk about andragogy, you are going to be hearing about Malcolm Knowles, who is really, the forefather of our current understanding and practice and the six principles. Originally, he had five assumptions and four principles when he was going through some of his early work. What I'd like to do is direct you to the handbook accompaniment that is on the IPDA website. If you want to learn a little bit more about that early work and what those five assumptions and four principles were, please go to the handbook, download it, to give you a little bit more information. Some of the tools will be there for later. It's really a good piece that I think you should take advantage of. For the sake of time today, we are going to go ahead and jump ahead, and we'll talk about how these have evolved into what we now consider the six guiding principles today. So one myth about andragogy is that it's the same as pedagogy, but just with adults. There are some extreme differences between the two. Um, Andragogy has unique characteristics, goals, and approaches designed specifically with the adult learner in mind. This is historically speaking, many AGE teachers approach instruction from a pedagogical perspective, and it causes lessened learner outcomes and a decrease in learner motivation and persistence. So I'll explain what I mean by that in a little bit, because what we're trying to do today is to separate the idea that pedagogy is teaching kids and andragogy is teaching adults. While true, they have separate principles and approaches and ways to approach them. And what can occur at times in an adult general education classroom is we may shift into a pedagogical approach because of the content and the learning that we're trying to deliver. And what we're really hoping the outcome of today is to strive towards an andragogical approach, which is more learning through the process of application and doing. So really, really big distinction there. It's not just about teaching kids or teaching adults. It's really, what does the teaching and learning look like in the classroom. When we go back to Malcolm Knowles, he, even before Marzano, he was talking about the art and science of teaching and the art and science of teaching adults. So we got a little comparison chart for you here and just some examples of how these may differ, even though sometimes it is kids versus adults, what that means as far as what happens and occurs in the classroom. So in a pedagogical approach, the learner is dependent on the teacher. The teacher will be the evaluator and be responsible for all learning that's occurring. In an andragogical approach, the learner is self-directed and capable to self-assess and take responsibility for their own learning. And we can kind of see how that one applies more to children and one applies more to adults, but can be have those age constrictions removed from those philosophical approaches to teachers. Pedagogy learners bring little background knowledge. A lot of times that is because we think of them entering into a classroom as youngsters and kids who don't have the experiences to go along with it. The teacher is going to have the most influence, as even those others in the classroom also lack that background knowledge and background and experience. In an andragogical classroom, the learner experience sets the foundation for learning, equal opportunity to learn from the peers as well as the teacher. This is a real important distinction, because when we are trying to honor the principles of andragogy, not being repetitive or redundant by bringing in content and material that many of the students may already have mastered within your classroom, that's one real quick way to lose some of their motivation and lose some of their investment in what you're trying to do and accomplish. In a pedagogical approach, learning and advancement is prescribed based on the curriculum. In andragogical, it's differentiated based on life circumstances and serves to fill gaps, not instruct comprehensively. And basically, think of this as, if I'm going to take my textbook, am I starting on page one and going chapter by chapter through the book, trying to teach every single thing that's in there? Or am I going to pre-assess my students, figure out what their mastery is in and what their strengths are, and then try and find those areas for growth, and then try and fill those areas for growth rather than trying to teach from beginning to end on a set curriculum. In pedagogy, external motivations such as parents and teachers are what drive student effort. And we know that from when we're kids, we didn't want to get in trouble. So, I have a ninth grade daughter and a fifth grade daughter, and it's real easy for me to find out how motivated they are in school when it's Sunday night and they're talking about, oh no, I have school tomorrow. So their motivation isn't coming from within; it's coming from, you have to do this because somebody's telling you have to do it, and it's part of the rule. In andragogy, internal motivators such as quality of life, recognition, self-esteem, mastery of new skills and knowledge are going to be what drives students to participate and be invested in the learning. There are some contingencies on that, which we'll talk about a little bit later, as far as being an educational provider. Does what we're delivering in the classroom match those motivating influences? And that's one of the key reasons when we start to look at program retention and student persistence. If those don't match, you get some problematic concerns that need to be addressed. And finally, the last one in our chart here, in pedagogy, you're acquiring subject matter and content. So basically, unfortunately, through the delivery of these webinars, it's difficult to provide an andragogical approach. But if you're taking notes, you're taking the handbook, you learn a few things from today's webinar. Really, you're acquiring that content that we're trying to deliver. An andragogical approach, you're going to be acquiring the applicable knowledge and relevant skills through doing and applying some of these things. So our hope is that you take these tools and walk away with this, and you implement them, and then it becomes transitions into a little bit of an andragogical approach to the delivery of this content. So moving along, I am monitoring the question and answer, and we don't see anything in there yet, so we will just keep plugging along. At this point, we enter into the Super Six principles, and like I said before, I've called it the prerequisite principle. Some refer to it as the quote unquote seventh principle, but basically what this is saying is that for andragogy to work, adults must want to learn. It's not going to be the teacher wanting them to learn. It's certainly not going to be their parents or someone they know wanting them to learn. This is definitely dependent on their motivation to be the one that wants to learn. We have a huge jump start being adult general education practitioners because our students show up the door. That means they want to learn. They're there for a reason, and it's our job to find out what those reasons are, because that's where the challenge comes in. We get a cheat code, we get a little jump start on, do our students that are sitting in front of us want to be there? Do they want to learn? Occasionally we have some younger GED preparation students that are still motivated by their parents. You're either going to get a job, go to school, or get out, and they end up in our classrooms, and we do the best that we can with them. But for the large majority, our students show up because they want to learn. They have an intended outcome. They have a goal. They have a specific skill or specific group of knowledge that they want to acquire and master. And that's going to drive their attendance and drive their effort within our classrooms. But like I said before, it comes with conditions. It's not unconditional. There's strings attached to the adults entering into our classroom with this wanting to learn. That means there's also an expectation that what our classrooms are delivering matches the skills and knowledge that they're seeking. That brings us back to not having a comprehensive approach to curriculum, because the comprehensive approach may not be targeted specifically towards what they're looking or it may be redundant in the areas that they've already mastered. So really, really important to get to know each and every student. That's one of the challenges we have. I know many of the programs have open enrollment, so you know, finding out whatever method you have, whether it's through orientation, through intake, through student interviews, through informal conversations, really getting to know each and every single one of your students, conducting those pre-assessments so that you know as you enter into specific lessons that you're able to target the areas for growth, and then really finding out what their long-term goals are so that you can bring those components of contextualization, because the more your classroom matches the reason that they are entering into your school, the more student persistence and continuation of this intrinsic adult wanting to learn motivation will continue and support you as you enter into the real Super Six principles. So, which we'll get to now. This is my favorite one, the first one. Why do they need to know this? Anytime we're trying to teach any of these things, as you come to webinar Wednesdays, I mean, we're preaching to the choir today. These are the superstars throughout the state that are attending this webinar. One of the first things that you see every Wednesday is, what are the objectives of the week? And the objectives of the week are really addressing why you need to know this content, why participating, engaging, listening in this webinar is going to be beneficial to you. It's WIFM, what's in it for me? And as you approach WIFM and making sure that that is clear on a daily basis, on a lesson-to-lesson basis, that's really going to help the students stay continued to be motivated as they go through your lessons. We really need to put ourselves in their shoes because we're all lifelong learners. When you look at it, not only just from the webinar Wednesdays, but think back to the best PD professional development opportunities that you've had. Have those been opportunities where, you've just been a sit and get, or, you listen to somebody speak and you take notes, or have they been opportunities where they align closely with what you love and what you want to learn about, which I think we're doing today with AGE, and then they give you opportunities to participate or do something as part of the learning instead of just listening to the theory. You actually get a chance to put it into application and know how it is going to improve your quality of life or improve your job performance or improve student outcomes within your programs. That what's in it for me is equally important for our students. So again, the same way when we look at that prerequisite principle, that seventh principle, the adults are showing up and they want to learn. The key is, do we know specifically what they want to learn about? And then are we connecting that with what's going on a daily basis with what's in our classroom? So the real key here is when you're talking about the what's in it for me for students, is it connecting directly to the same reason that they came to your program and what they want to learn about? The second principle of andragogy is the experience that the adults are going to bring into the classroom. That these are adults that are come from a wide variety of backgrounds and life experiences, and we really need to try to pay attention to that as much as we can, utilize that as a foundation for learning. They are not coming into our classrooms as blank slates. We are trying to honor what they already know, respect what they already know, listen to what they already know, and not revisit mastered components. There should also be opportunity for students to learn from each other and the wealth of experience and knowledge that are in the classroom. What I've seen occur sometimes, unfortunately, not just in adult general education, but in all classrooms, is the teacher becomes the owner of the content. And really what should ideally happen is the teacher should let go and not own the content and own the learning, but try and figure out ways to get your students to be working together so that they can have conversations and learn from each other, which also brings them an opportunity to develop some employability skills of teamwork and collaboration. But this is where the real hard part of teaching, the art and science of teaching adults, is devising and creating opportunities for our students to explore, to team, to collaborate, to research, and to present on what their learning is, and let them figure out where directions they want to go with their learning, as opposed to us devising a lesson and standing there and teaching and explaining and pointing out all the things that are important for the students to remember, because that's really not effective, and it really limits the autonomy that an adult learner wants to experience. And through the shift of the principles of andragogy, a lot of practitioners in K-12 are starting to realize as well that all learners want some autonomy and direction, and say so over what they're going to be looking at, and which leads us directly into the next principle, which is self-concept. And adult learners are not dependent. They want to have a voice in what they're doing and the learning options. It's not propped up just by the lecture abilities of the teacher. At this point, if this was a classroom where we participated on a daily basis and you were going to be with me for 6 hours, it's time to wrap it up. It's time to allow the students to have some choice in the assignment, some direction in what their learning is, some self-discovery of the content, rather than me pointing out all of the pieces that should be remembered and that are important about andragogy. This should really be student-centered and more directly focused on the you-do of the gradual release model. So I know many of you, or all of you, are probably very familiar with the gradual release model, which is I do as a teacher, I'm going to model for you. It's good for you to see an example and understand what we're looking for. Then we're going to do it together. But a lot of times, how often do we ever really get to the you do, and how long do we spend in the you do? And really trying to tip the scales a little bit of that, so that we spend a majority of our time in you do, even if it's through error and wrong direction sometimes. Having the confidence of the teacher that you can reel that back in, and that we oftentimes learn through making mistakes, and learn by error, and by one of the students making an error, the other students having an opportunity to correct it, or for them assessing their own progress in comparison to the work that their classmates are showing, for them to self-assess and self-correct, and really, that's the struggle and the hard part. Even in the name, what we're called teachers. That means I need to actively be teaching, but really, allowing your students to be learners as much as you want to be a teacher. And sometimes that means that we need to remove ourselves, not entirely, but like the saying goes, to be more so the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage. Moving on to our readiness. This is much like the guiding prerequisite principle, the seventh principle. Are adult learners ready for the challenge and effort the learning process will demand? Again, they've shown up at our door. How do we keep them there? And it has to be, the material and the content needs to address and align and match with the reason that they showed up in our programs. They came to us for a reason. Is the content we're delivering directly connected to the reason that they showed up? Not in a long-term down the road sense, like, okay, trust me and believe me, and eventually we're going to get there, and this is all going to make sense to you. No, we want instant gratification. We want to know that today's lesson directly leads to me being able to acquire the skills that I came here for, or me being able to take 2 giant steps towards readiness for the career pathway that I'm on for that additional program, and continuing to make those steps. This one, sometimes we believe that the students, and oftentimes the students do look at us like we're superheroes. All faith is in us to get us to where we need to go. But often we take for granted, and we assume that students are making the connections of how today's lesson or today's content, today's activities and assignments align with this problem that we're trying to solve or with these skills that we're trying to acquire, but sometimes that connection isn't as obvious as we think it is. So this is where, we've had some IP Day webinars recently that talk about assessment, that talk about student learning scales, building uh, that connection into that learning scale where you're detailing exactly how today's lesson links to the long-term objectives and links to the short-term objectives is going to continue to just feed into and strengthen and bolster those other principles that are required here. And really, one way to do this is just to ask yourself, what problems are students experiencing that need solving? What brought them to the classroom? Is it employment? Is it a high skill, high paying career? And if so, how are you aligning your instruction so that it becomes a shortcut to that end goal? And is it connected? Can they see that connection between what you're doing in a GED preparation, an ABE classroom, an ESOL classroom? Can they see that connection to the high skill, high paying career that they came here for? A lot of times that's going to require differentiation. You're not all going to have. It would be great if within the classroom they all came for the same reason and they all have that same end goal. But that's likely not going to be the case. So how do you differentiate so that you can show each of them, how today's content aligns with each of their goals, even if those goals are a little bit different. And a perfect example is when we look at the different career clusters. So you've got a couple students that want to be nurses, you got a couple students that want to be electricians, you got a couple students that want to be business management. So how do you differentiate for all of those? And well, explain your process. Explain how you're going to have to go through these different assignments and these different assignments, or you differentiate to provide some assignment choice within the work that allows them to align that with the career cluster of their choice. So obviously is going to take a little bit more planning, a little bit more hard work. The hardest job in any school is that of a teacher, especially a high performing, engaging teacher. So, trying to attune to that is a great way for those people that are willing to self-sacrifice, do that extra work for the benefit of their students, but don't really know what that's going to look like on a day-to-day basis as they're going through their framework and trying to devise those lessons that are going to really capture everybody's attention. And this is really one way that they can capitalize that and put that into practice within their classrooms. So, problem orientation. Andragogical learning should not be focused on the acquisition of stored knowledge and content. So, again, this is not going to be me or a teacher in a classroom giving you a long list of things that are important. Okay, this is the topic. These are the things that are important to remember. Once you memorize this list, you're going to be considered a mastery of this content. Really, that's not how learning occurs. We know that it's and that's this is if anything encapsulate andragogy, this is the one because it's the practical application of that knowledge. So I don't know all the stuff. I know how to use all the stuff. I can solve problems. I can perform tasks. I can develop specific skills through practice, trial, and error. We learn by doing. Those of you that know how to ride a bike, did you open a book that said, this is how you learn to ride a bike? And you read chapter 1 and it tells you how to pedal, and you read chapter 2 and it tells you how to steer, and you read chapter 3, it tells you how not to fall off. Unfortunately, that is not how it works. I know because I read a book on how to golf, and guess what? I'm a terrible golfer still. So the only way to learn how to ride a bike, the only way to learn how to golf is by going out, putting it into practice, and learning by failing. You fall off the bike, you get back on, you fall off the bike, you get back on, you fall off the bike, you get back on. Eventually, you don't fall off the bike anymore. The same way juggling, you drop the balls, you pick them up, you drop the balls, you pick them up. We learn by doing, we learn by failing, we learn by trying again. That is the surest, quickest way to be able to take theory into practice is by doing it. We get better at things by doing them. So that means as a teacher, you got to stop and you got to look at your lessons and you got to ask yourself, what are my students doing through this activity? What are my students doing through this lesson? How am I providing them opportunities to implement the learning objectives that I have for them? How am I providing opportunities for them to fail and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes through this activity? And if you don't have the answer to that, that's really a good starting point to go back on when you're doing your lesson planning, to revisit that, to ask those questions, to encourage your teachers during their planning time and during their we know they get together during lunch. If you've asked those and you've reflected personally on those and you don't have the answers, because I've already taught this the best way that I know how and my students are still struggling, but I've already taught it the best way I know what's going to be next? What am I going to do? How am I going to teach it again? Those are the moments and things that we want our conversations with on campus to revolve around, so that you can really start to build on the strengths of each other as colleagues, and lift the capacity of lesson delivery on your whole campus. But it's really takes a mindset shift and a willingness to dig a little bit deeper and ask these questions in reflection on every single lesson that you're delivering. And then finally, this one, again, with adult learners, particularly in adult general education, you're not learning this because we've said you have to. You're learning this because you have a reason of self-improvement, a reason of skill acquisition specifically, and you just have a higher level of motivation that's going to ultimately improve learner outcomes, because the adults have a higher determination and a higher level of effort. Again, that is only going to happen if what they see in the classroom aligns with what the reason is for them coming to your campus. This is, again, where your intake process and your orientation can really, really help, because it can help set those expectations of when students come to your programs and they register for class, the difference of that picture they have in their mind of what they're going to walk into versus what they actually walk into. It's never going to match 100%, but being able to clearly explain and inquire from the students and gain as much information as we can from them, so that we can be flexible, be mendable. That's one of the greatest advantages of adult general education. There is no recipe or guide that says we have to do things a certain way, especially with our GED preparation students. I'm a perfect example of somebody who didn't finish high school because the learning that was occurring in that high school setting did not match my needs. And what was expected to happen was I was expected to shift and change to fit into the cookie cutter format that was being provided to me as a learner, and not being able to do so, or not being willing to do so, led to me not completing high school. When I came back as a GED preparation student, one of the most refreshing things that I see now in reflection is that institution is able to deliver this content and merge their program. And instead of expecting the students to fit into the structure that we've created, we have the full ability to make the structure that we create blend and meld and merge into each individual learner to a specific extent. The reason why that doesn't happen 100% of the time, because it's hard and difficult and takes a lot of hard work. But I think, I'm a strong proponent of following these principles and reviewing them and asking ourselves those reflective questions. Do my lessons and do the structures within our programs align with and provide these sorts of opportunities? Or am I walking into a classroom where the teacher's guiding and evaluating the content, owning the learning, spending a lot of time lecturing or participating in whole group conversations? Or are they releasing and giving the students opportunities to complete things and create things, and to engage in self-guided learning that aligns directly with those differentiated standards and goals. So to help with that process, we have created a little bit of a planning tool that will walk you through each principle as you are conducting these lesson plans. Principle one, just as a little bit of a recap, and again, this will also be in the handbook, so make sure that you go and download the handbook. It'll be valuable for you, and you can print it and you can share it in your department. How will you make clear to your adult learners that the lesson is important to their purpose for participation? What's in it for them? Again, this one's real easy to make a broad, sweeping stroke of why it might be important in a general sense. But what you really want to do, the answer to this question might be a little bit different from student to student. So in each of these, as we go through, keep in mind that it's going to require some differentiation and a heavy knowledge of who the students are that are sitting in front of you on a day-to-day basis. What are those experiences that they're bringing in, and what are the range of those adult experiences that could help or hinder achievement of the learning target? So one way that experience can hinder achievement of learning target is if I feel like I know this and I feel like I've mastered this content, but I could be doing it wrong for 20 years, or it could be different here than it was in my home country. So sometimes those learner experiences need to be redirected and corrected. So being aware of those just as much as you are aware of the ones that are beneficial and helpful, and taking advantage of those. How are you determining what the gaps are before you get into a lesson? If you're just devising a lesson and teaching it to the whole class, whatever that lesson's on, whether it's mathematical, numeracy, literacy, if you have not devised some form of pre-assessment, and I'm not talking about CASAS goals and TABE and life-ready tests. I'm not talking about these comprehensive tests that come every 70 hours within class. I'm talking on each individual learning target. Are you devising some pre-assessments that help me determine what my students already know so I can take advantage of it, and what gaps exist? And then also understanding that you may have students that require enrichment, some that are approaching or meeting the standard, and some that need quite a bit of intervention to get there. So how are you differentiating based on those experiences, based on that prior knowledge, to make that lesson as engaging and matter to each and every individual student, no matter what their experience and prior knowledge is? And that takes a lot of work, but you have to be strategic and you have to be intentional about doing it. And then finally, the last question in this experience one is what activity can you create that allows students to share their knowledge and learning with each other? How do you take advantage of the ones that come into it with some expertise to benefit those that are lacking that expertise, and creating this environment where we are learning and sharing and depending on each other, and all learning isn't flowing through that sole individual that's standing at the front of the classroom. For principle 3, self-concept, the question, how can I provide some student autonomy with the direction of the learning or through an assignment choice? So, sometimes this happens fluidly when you're trying to figure out, through a pre-assessment, which is strongly recommended, who your expert learners are, who's approaching the standard, and who's far below. And that creates a couple different assignment choices. But also, what are they going to create as part of this lesson? I certainly hope that your lessons in your classrooms aren't ending in a worksheet, aren't ending in notes, or maybe a writing sample could be one of the assignment choices. Maybe a presentation could be one of the assignment choices. Maybe a poster or a game. What are those different things that you can put into place that your students are going to be able to show to you that they've mastered the content? And it doesn't mean you don't have to determine what that assessment is going to be. At the end of this, we're going to do a Kahoot, and then I'm going to know that everybody learned or didn't learn. Well, maybe that's not the choice that they want to make. And just by delivering that solitary thing that the teacher has determined takes away some of that student autonomy. Ultimately, whatever those assignment choices, the teacher creates all the assignment choices. So the autonomy is limited, although, it is possible that you just go in there and say, hey, how do you all want to prove to me that you've mastered this learning objective, and see what they have to say. But these are the type of things and approaches that we want to occur, that gives the student some command over the direction of their learning. And certainly the foundation of this one is not that we are telling everybody everything that's important for the learning standard because it's in the framework. This is not the list of things that are important to remember, write them down and memorize them. That is absolutely not the way to go with this. How are your students going to choose the direction of their learning, and how are they going to have ownership over that self-assessment of their progress? We talked about that webinar from a few weeks back that was about assessment, that had a learning scale. The beauty of creating a learning scale, it empowers your students to assess their progress. And if I have a learning scale that goes from level 1 through level 4, that avoids deficit language, that talks about what I can do as opposed to what I can't do, I can now look at myself and how far I've come on this lesson objective, and I can plug myself in on that learning scale, and I can determine where I am. And that's just as important, if not more important, than the teacher being able to assess where students are, because these are going to be the little nuggets on a daily basis that drive a student's effort, because they are now self-assessing. And if I'm self-assessing, I'm seeing my progress, and it doesn't seem like that finish line is so far away. We know that teaching and learning is like watching the grass grow. Men love to cut the grass because they cut the grass and you have immediate gratification. You can see how great it looks. Learning is much, much harder. Progress is slow and painful at times. So if you empower your students through a learning scale to be able to self-assess their own progress, that gives you a little bit of a benefit where they can continue to be motivated because they can feel the gains that they're making on a lesson by lesson basis, as opposed to waiting 72 hours and going and taking the CASAS and seeing a 4-point or an 8-point scale score gain. That really means very little for a student, as opposed to being able to assess their progress on individual skills and targets and goals. So really, really important. Readiness, how will I connect the content to immediate real life problems and needs, or better yet, facilitate students making that connection? So, again, what we're doing in the classroom, this goes back into the what's in it for me, but it also goes into how can I apply what I'm learning to solve the problems that are in my life. If I'm looking for a high skill, high wage, high paying career, I need some relevancy to the skills acquisition that I need to transition into that career, and the skills that I'll need in that career cluster, so that I can get that high paying job, so that I can put food on the table, so that I can buy the house that I want, so I can provide for my family. How does what you're doing connect immediately to that? And sometimes that connection may be like, okay, this is going to be that slow, arduous, painful progression of progress like we talked about. So what's the immediate problem that this solves? How is this connecting to that longer chain of events that need to occur, so that a student will stay motivated and continue with that persistence to continue on to the program? Problem orientation, what activities and students centered assignments will the teacher use to give the student opportunity to acquire application and not just content theory? Again, we learn by doing. So how are you going to give them the opportunity to prove through the application of that knowledge that they know and can apply what they've done? How are you going to give them opportunities to make mistakes, so that they can compare their work with each other's works, and their learning with each other's learning, as I'm assessing where I stand on that learning scale? So really, really, if nothing else, like I talked about initially when we hit number 5, this problem orientation, figuring out a way to give them that opportunity to do something with the learning is really the most important. And honestly, in the time that I've been in adult general education, the fact that we don't apply grades like a K-12 system does, and I think we apply grades in K-12 so that the parents and teachers and those other people that are providing the motivation can know how the students are doing, so they can apply more motivation. But the thing about having mandatory grades, it's mandatory assessment. So, everybody knows how they're doing because they get an opportunity to perform. Without grades, I see so many lectures and whole group discussions, um, and it's really a disservice to the opportunities that we have to give the students a chance to do something and learn from mistakes, and experience and acquire knowledge through application as opposed to through content memorization. And again, finally, the intrinsic motivation. Have you aligned your lesson choices appropriately with the various student motivations? Various student motivations, again, highlighting the fact that it's going to require some differentiation. This is not a one size fits all. It's not going to be a one solution is going to address and answer this question for every student that's sitting in front of you. It might not even answer the question for every student on Monday compared to on Friday. You've got to know your students where you can adapt, blend, meld on the fly, to allow for full program participation, applied self-assessment strategies, and all of the other above principles. So we really hope that, by using this planning tool and by giving some attention to the principles of andragogy, initially it may be a grand departure from the way that lesson planning is occurring, or it may be something that you're already accounting for some of this just naturally in your lesson planning. But really trying to take a comprehensive approach and look at all of these components, because each one is going to play a key role, not only in getting students excited about coming into class because it's going to be more fun and engaging, but it's also going to lead to that student-centered environment, defined by those student outcomes that we want. How do you measure the success of your program? It's by student outcomes. And which student outcomes are we looking at? Are you measuring your success by the student outcomes of your 10 highest performing students in your program? Are you measuring your success by the 10 lowest performing students in your program? And when you start to look at how do we make our program fit the needs of our lowest performing and work your way backwards, I think that's when you really start to be innovating in some of your approaches, and provide some opportunities that are going to lead to greater student outcomes, not only for that group, but for all the students in general. We do have, when you download the PowerPoint, some additional resources where some of this content came from. And it looks like my PowerPoint, there we go. Okay, now it's moving. We do want to refer you to some additional IPDAY training that will bring you some additional tools. The one that I talked about repeatedly here is assessing student progress. It comes with a toolkit. It talks about those learning scales, but we also have some others here that relate to IET. And by going to the IPDAY website, all the resources that are available to you, not just through the webinars, but through the other opportunities. I really want to highlight IET because, again, it's that career mindset. It's the solving the problems in the students' lives, and it's not just that short term. I'm here to learn English. I'm here to get my high school diploma. Okay, well that solves the storm in your life right now, but what's next and what comes after that? And I think IET provides the key of what that differentiation needs to look like in many of our classrooms. So these resources are here along with many others. Some of the research that led to today's presentation. And we do want to just go ahead and pause here for a few minutes and get to any questions and answers. I've been trying to monitor the question and answer section, and I don't see any questions there, but I will look in the chat to see if there's any sections in the chat. Oh, thank you. We do have the PowerPoint and handbook was uploaded into the chat. That's great. Much appreciated. It's always nice when things are convenient and easy to get to.
Brian, thanks so much. We've been answering the questions as you've been going along. So thank you so much. Right now, you're going to see some 3 short questions that are going to appear on the screen. We really would appreciate if you would take a minute of your time to answer these 3 short questions.
And thank you all so much for letting me enter into your Wednesday today and have this opportunity to share some of the things that we've been focused on here in Broward County at Atlantic Technical College.
Brian, I always learn from you. So thank you so much for your time in facilitating our webinar today. So stay tuned for more professional development coming your way, and stay safe, everyone. And thank you for joining us today.